So welcome everyone. My name is James here at the Raleigh Wine Shop, here with a longtime friend of mine and friend of the wine business in the Triangle and in North Carolina, Max Kast. For those of you, the few of you who may not know Max, he has been an integral part of the wine and beverage scene here in the Triangle for quite a while. A few of us can remember back when there wasn't much of a food and wine scene in the Triangle, not nearly to the extent that it is now. And while he certainly didn't do it single-handedly, he was absolutely, undisputedly one of the very small handful of people who was very responsible for changing the culture from the ground and from the inside out. So I've considered him a friend and a mentor for a long time, and I'm pleased and honored to have him join us for a little chat this afternoon. That is my introduction of Max. If you wanna take it from there and kind of give us the Max introduction of Max and kind of tell us what got Max Kast into wine as a career back in the day.
Well, first off, I just want to say thank you for that really, really kind introduction, man. I really appreciate that a lot. The Triangle has always been such a cool place, and there always really has been such a great food and wine scene here. It's just been in different pockets all the time, you know.
Right.
What I mean? So
Right.
I just feel privileged to be a part of such a big group of really talented people, including you guys. And I really cherish my relationship with you guys. And I remember the bottle of Domaceria you and I bonded over the first time we met.
Yes.
Thinking about that the other day.
Yeah.
But yeah, so thanks again for that.
Absolutely.
I got into wine while I was in college. I think like a lot of people, right? We all have our different moments where we get the wine bug. I was fortunate enough to grow up in a family that was very involved in food and wine. My dad was a big lover of wine, great food. We tried. Because of him and my mom, we traveled a lot. They spent all of their money not on giving us trust funds, but on making sure we traveled a lot. So that was their gift to me, and I was very, very grateful for that. And that kind of gave me a really big interest from a young age. But it wasn't until I was in college and I was working in restaurants to make money so I can go to school. I got to a point where I was looking at either law school or becoming a history professor. And I was working with this kind of weird meeting of people. It was a chef who had been working throughout the 90s for Thomas Douglas in Seattle. He was former executive sous chef. He was waiting to open up his own restaurant in Missoula, Montana, where I went to college. And he's like, all right, I'm going to work at this place and help them develop a tapas menu. And then my other buddy, who was a sommelier in Charleston in the 90s, just happened to be like, yeah, I'll help along too. So I had these two guys with all this experience who were like, man, like you really seem to like be passionate, like your eyes light up when you talk about food and wine. Why do you want to go to law school? Why do you want to get your degree in history? You can have a cool career working in hospitality. And I'm like, hey, yeah, you're right. And it also kind of coincided with me meeting my wife, getting married, then whole 9 yards, having my daughter. So it was eventually like, all right, I need to make this my career because all the signs are pointing me that way, and it's really cool and very fulfilling.
That's really cool. That's a great story. Speaking of your family, at one of the when we first met, you were at Farrington House, and you mentioned it just being a literally idyllic place to raise a family. So can you tell us kind of how you ended up at Farrington House and a little bit about your time managing a beverage program there at Farrington House?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. So to go really quickly how I got there, I was once I finished school, I was on the 7-year college graduation. The early years, I really just lots of skiing, like concert promoting, playing in bands and stuff like that. But once I finally graduated, I got a job as a wine director at a Relais and Chateau called Triple Creek Ranch. So that was, I mean, the luckiest break I could have possibly have gotten, quite honestly. So I took another great mentor, a gentleman named Colin Vance. Him and his wife, they worked at in a Little Washington before taking over at Triple Creek. He was the assistant general manager at the French Laundry. So all of a sudden, I go from like making this decision to like spending a month with this couple and working with him and Deborah, and just getting that was like my master's degree in hospitality working with these guys, right? So I was 25 years old, running this wine program. Ended up going to a Relais and Chateau conference in Geneva, Switzerland, with the general managers of this Relais and Chateau, Triple Creek. And I met R.B. Fitch and Teresa Chiatini there, and the general manager and owner of the Farrington House. And, you know, living in Darby, Montana, in the middle of nowhere, it was really beautiful. We loved it. I missed the mountains. I sometimes wish I was there now so I can do all the trail running I want. But it was really remote, and having at that point, 2-year-old daughter, it didn't really work out for school and things like that. So I flew out here. I fell in love with the Farrington House. Teresa Chiatini is, I mean, one of the great general managers. Joris Harhus, who just retired this year, one of the, I think, just legendary maitre d's in the country. A lost art, and you don't see many of those anymore. And that's kind of how I got started at the Farrington House and started there. And that it was really one of the most fulfilling 10 years of my career working there.
That's really cool.
Yeah, it was.
So was there during that time, either while you were working at Triple Creek or when you got to Farrington House, one of the things that we all of us in the business have that bottle or that 2 or that 3, like the one where you're like, oh wow, this kind of changes everything, and this kind of makes. Was there a single bottle for you, or a couple of bottles in particular that you have still that touchstone memory of?
For sure. The most important one for me is Chateau Musar, actually, and that's when I was in college still. It's a bottle of 1991 Chateau Musar. Opened that up. Just blew my mind. I'd been reading about it from books I took out from the library, and there's before and after that bottle for me.
Understood.
Then there was also a number of times at like 94, 95 La Tâche from Domaine Romani Conti. Like those wines, it's like, yes, they're so expensive. Yes, like they're almost so like popular and talked about that they're almost like fake. But they are ethereal, beautiful, just absolutely stunning wines. And then, quite honestly, like 1974, Maya Kamis and Heights Cellars Martha Vineyard. Those are some of the most memorable wines of my life. I mean, really, those like mid 60s, early 70s Napa Cabernet Sauvignons are. I had those for the first time in like my late 20s and 30s when I was working at the Farrington House, and those wines just they're next level. But even those like the Mondavi Reserves from the 80s, the Opus Ones from the 80s. I mean, going in through the 90s as well. It's just really some of the Chapelet signature Cabernet Sauvignon. If you can't tell, I love Napa Cabernet Sauvignon. Particularly old, but there's lots of new Napa Cabernet that I still really enjoy. And I mean, Spotswood, and Spotswood's such an amazing wine. I can go on and on, so I'll be quiet.
That's quite all right. No, that's what we're here for. So you find yourself at the Farrington House in beautiful North Carolina. What was it like to take over a program there, and what was it like to kind of build an entire beverage program there for you?
So, to be fair, I took over. The Farrington House has had a sommelier working the floor and running the wine program since like 1991, right? So when I took over like a stunning wine program, So I was 20, almost 27, 26. Basically, it was up to me to not screw it up. And no, seriously.
Oh, I hear you. Yeah.
I mean, there was 800, 900 selections on the list. You had a full selection of DRC. You had pages upon pages of older Burgundy, older Bordeaux, Rhone Valley wines. I mean, Bordeaux going to the early 60s.
Wow.
Actually, Sauternes going to the 1940s. Like it really was a program where that was one of the reasons where I'm like, I need to work here. Like I read the wine list, I'm like, sweet, I get to work with
Yeah.
it. So it really that first couple of years was pretty nerve wracking because that was granted I had a great list at Triple Creek Ranch and I ran that, but at the Farrington House it was a lot of learning on the job, you know what I mean? And it's in some ways, you know, I always envy people who had like a lot of mentors, like people who worked with other sommeliers who've been in business for a long time, be they MSs or not. People who really had that sort of mentorship. I didn't have. I've had mentors, but as far as work's concerned, I really like learned a lot of that stuff on kind of by trial and error. There's lots of benefits to that, but there's also lots of
risk, right?
And to be fair, I would always be asking people for advice. You know, and it was exhilarating, stressful. I mean, just doing the inventory there every month, that was such a gargantuan feat, you know? And then, so I took that and then I grew the lists to about 2,000 selections. And really what I wanted to do was invest heavily in Italy because there wasn't that investment yet. I grew the selection of Barolos and Barbarescos. I grew the Tuscan selection, so Great Brunello de Montalcino, Great Chianti Classico, all the great producers from all those areas. And I'm like, all right, well, this is a great area to invest. Bordeaux is super expensive. The last pre-sale we did on Bordeaux was 2005. I'm like, we're not doing that again. And we're going to, don't get me wrong, I love Bordeaux as well. Hence, you see there's 2 bottles back there.
Yeah.
Those are from Bordeaux. Really amazing wines. But my way of thinking then was that, you know, the value is going to be in Barolo and Barbaresco. You're looking like 2007, 2008, 2009 is when I'm buying these wines. That really was a prime time to get a lot for your money. And I was buying like Capilano, like old school, like Castello di Verduno, like a lot of old school producers, but then also Borgogno, a lot like just kind of like a wide variety across the board, you know.
Very cool. So you have recently, I say recently, I think it was a couple of years ago at least now, you recently transitioned away from Farrington, turned that over to another friend and colleague of mine, Paula DePano. What was it like to turn it over to turn your baby over to someone else, and how was that transition into the importing world for you?
Again, number one, turning like knowing, like I begged Paula to take over the program, because like Paula is one of the best wine professionals in the country, and she's more on it than I ever was, and she's just, I mean, insanely talented. So she worked with me for 3 or 4 years. And then she went and worked on the wine team at 11 Madison Park. And then her and her husband moved back down here because they wanted to get out of the city. And she wasn't sure at first. I'm like, hey, listen, I'm going to work for Broadbent. I had known the folks at Broadbent for a long time. I met Bartholomew for the first time in 2008. Lisa Norris, who was like, hey, do you know anyone who'd like to work there? that will work with us. I'm like, what about me? She's like, And so it turned
Yeah.
into this. We're like, she's like, that's not what I expected, but interesting. So
Right.
it worked out to be a really good transition. I'll be honest with you, doing that, going from being in hospitality over into being the supplier side and working on the importer, that's like a whole new world, man. So like
Right.
being a sommelier wine director, 50% of the time it's hospitality and service, right? If
Right.
not more. It's like, but and then you also have the business of the sommelier, making sure you keep inventories, making sure you're making profits for the company, right? And that you're working on keeping your margins, all of that stuff. But everything is business of wine once you get over to the
Right.
imports. And there's a whole new language that I was not really, I wasn't hip to. I did as much research as I could, but
Right.
you go into meetings with distributors and they're like mentioning all these things. I'm like, I'm gonna shake my head, pretend I know what I'm talking about. I'm gonna do all this stuff when I get out of here. Yeah. And there was a lot of that my first year, to be honest with you. But it was pretty exhilarating. It was a hustle. And going from being in at the Farrington house where I see everyone every single day. It's like, hey, what's happening? How's your weekend? Like you have that camaraderie, and you go out there and do service every night, and it's almost like theater meets sports, right?
Right.
Like the sort of. Yeah, and we didn't have a lot of turnover at the Farrington house, so we had a strong team. We all were simpatico, and we all were in it to help each other out all the time, right? And then going from that environment to you're all by yourself. You see the people you work with every once in a while. You'll have some winemakers come into town. That first year, like you send for every email you send, maybe 15 to 20% respond to you because okay, and that first year is was pretty lonely and a big learning curve, and it was humbling, but it also took me out of my comfort zone, which I think was really important for me finally, because that was in the midst of the end couple of years of me taking the MS exam. And that me coming out of my comfort zone was really important in me finally getting over that hump and passing the exam.
Awesome. No, that's really fun. So with the transition into importing, you said you had known the guys at Broadbent for a while. What was it specifically about Bartholomew, and what was it about Broadbent that made you say, hey, this is the place that I want to go? I mean, you could have gone wherever you wanted. Why was this the one that just like, this is the calling that was going to bring me out of that comfort zone?
All the people in the company.
Right.
I mean, I knew Kat Miles, who's no longer with us, but Kat Miles, I'd known her for a long time. She's a great wine professional. Lisa is a phenomenal wine professional. Like I said, I knew Bartholomew for a while, and I knew that there is a culture of and that related to the producers as well, where it's a culture of integrity when it comes to the product, right? It's not a product; it's an art. It's a piece of art. It's agriculture meets art, and that's the way I view artists in winemaking and great winemakers. And to be able to work with people like the De Martino family, or Adi Badenhorst, or the Hochar family from Musar, Tyrrells in Australia, all of these people who, I mean, make some of the best wines in the world, and are definitely the best examples of what they do, right?
Right.
To go out and sell these wines, I'm passionate about them. And that's one of those things that was important and why I wanted to go there. It's like, well, I want to learn about this part of the wine business. I think it's really important for me as my development as a professional. I was in my late 30s and now 40. So like moving on to, I want to get a full understanding of how the wine business works. I'm still nowhere close, but it was to be able to go in, say, and taste wines with you guys and be like, I'm going to pour a bunch of wine and all of them are great and I believe in them 100%. From the affordable wine to the high end
Right.
wine, and there's not yes, there are some importers that are like that, and importers I love it's the same case, right? But it's not always that case in the wine business.
Absolutely. No, that's a great point.